I greatly respect Noggin. He is genuinely one of my favorite YouTubers, and quite possibly the best theorist YouTuber currently out there, considering that he doesn't make massive stretches that often, and usually frames it as such when he does. That being said, there are a few theories he made that I consider to be misses, especially his older ones. Because of this, I want to rewatch a few and see how they check out, and whether new information means they hold up or not. What I wanted to look at today is an old Pokemyth of his, which mentioned the idea of the real Kangaskhan actually being the baby, as opposed to the mother. I want to go and make a few points, some directly related to his video, some less so. First off is his opening, where he talks about your egg hatching. And aside, there's a beautiful Kangaskhan. And another Kangaskhan. This is as much an argument as it is a joke, which is fair enough. However, this brings up a major point of interest that I think many Pokemon theorists and the like seem to forget about. It is very likely that Pokemon breeding mechanics simply aren't canon. Now, what do I mean with this? First of all, look at things like the items required for decent breeding. A Destiny Knot affects the genetics of your Pokemon, for example. Having a Destiny Knot on your Pokemon in the daycare means that multiple individual values, essentially related to the genetics, are passed on perfectly from one parent to the other. Now this can possibly be passed off as being supernatural. After all, it's logical for two Pokemon to fall in love simply because one of them is carrying some red wool with them, which is its in-battle application. But the same argument can't quite be made for the power items, which ensure a specific stat is passed along. Unlike a Destiny Knot, these seem to be entirely grounded in logic, as they increase the effects of your Pokemon's training by limiting their body, increasing the speed with which they grow in the stat quite dramatically. Essentially the effect of weighted clothing in Dragon Ball. Now, these have the added effect of absolutely ensuring the relevant stat is carried along perfectly from parent to child. So if 0 IV Speed parent Pokemon holds a power anklet, it ensures the child gets 0 IVs as well, every single time. This can't be explained as easily, as there's no reason to believe there's a supernatural element to it. Could you imagine how that would work in real life? Imagine if Usain Bolt simply wore a heavy anklet while making a baby, and that this ensured his offspring inherited his speed, or at least the genetics related to his running speed, perfectly. And then there's incenses. Snorlax can only breed Munchlax if it holds the relevant incense. Could you imagine your child coming out as an adult every time you forget to light a nice, scented candle before doing the do? Another point to keep in mind are genderless Pokemon, and to a lesser extent male-only Pokemon. Genderless Pokemon can't reproduce amongst themselves, but they can produce eggs with dittos. How does this work? It makes no real sense. Does a ditto copy the Pokemon's genetics and somehow separately make an egg, in some strange asexual way? Well, then how would inheriting the genetics work there? Is its own DNA infused in it? It makes little sense, considering it perfectly copies everything in battle. It can't transform into the genderless Pokemon to produce an egg together either, since genderless Pokemon can't breed amongst themselves. Not to mention some dex entries contradicting breeding as a possibility entirely. An example would be Minior. Originally making its home in the ozone layer, it hurtles to the ground when the shell enclosing its body grows too heavy. Strong impacts can knock it out of its shell. This Pokemon was born from mutated nanoparticles. It eats dust in the atmosphere. The composition of the dust determines the color of its core. These 3 dex entries paint the image that it gains sentience through something like radiation, possibly from the sun, eats dust until it ends up growing too heavy, which also happens to determine its color in the process, falls to the earth, and then lives there. Which means this Pokemon is born asexually entirely. But then how would this add up with breeding? It can only reproduce with breeding, and the offspring always ends up getting the color of the Minior it's born from. How would this work? A Pokemon like this simply doesn't make sense if it grows inside of an egg. Then there's male-only Pokemon. Now take Tauros or Braviary. Pokemon's breeding mechanics make it so that the female Pokemon determines the species of the newborn Pokemon. So a female Skitty or a male Wailord will always give you a Skitty. This brings up how ridiculous the way species intermingle in the daycare is too, and that's not the argument I'm working towards. Despite Miltank and Mandibus essentially being the female equivalents of Tauros and Braviary, the offspring will always be Miltank or Mandibus if you throw these pairs together. Not to mention Pokemon like the Hitmon family and Sark and Throh. The mechanics in Pokemon suggest that they literally can't reproduce and create more of their own kind unless they pair up with Dittos. I simply don't think we can assume that this is canon. This would mean extinction of these species if there weren't any Ditto around, and how would they even evolve, as a real-world evolution, to be the way they are if they can only do it with Dittos? It makes absolutely no sense unless there's a massive, unseen Ditto population nearby every single time. Now, back to Noggin's video for real. Kangaskhan. The original theory is that the baby Kangaskhan is the real Kangaskhan, while the adult is merely a dummy, comparable to, say, Wobbuffet and his tail. Now, at the time this was a flawed but sort of plausible theory, and the following evidence was simply not available back when he made this video, so I can't blame him one bit for not knowing this. But in Pokémon Sun and Moon there are now Dex entries for available Mega Pokémon, which includes Kangaskhan. Because of this, Kangaskhan got 4 new entries total, with 3 of them actively debunking his theory. The child in its pouch leaves home after roughly 3 years. That is the only time the mother is heard to cry wildly. Mega Kangaskhan's strength derives from the mother's happiness about her child's growth. Watching it grow keeps her spirits up high. And most humorously, and sorta sadly too, thanks to Mega Evolution, its child grows. But as the child is good only at fighting and nothing else, its mother feels uneasy about its future. All 3 of these actively say that the mother is fully sentient, and that the child grows up on his or her own. Once more, I can't blame Noggin since these entries are new, but they do simply debunk his theory. Either way, I hope that this was informative and convinced a few people of the issues with theories relying on breeding mechanics. I have to apologize for rambling the way I have and for going off topic in a few ways, but I wanted to use this as an example of where this general idea that breeding mechanics should be taken at face value falls short. Too many theories seem to rely on it, and it's a very sketchy thing. Now, on this note, I must thank you all for watching, and if you did enjoy this, please like, comment, subscribe, all those good things. I don't know if I'll do more of these, but if people like this one, I might consider doing more. Of course, I'd only do so if I can think of a particularly good theory myself, or if I find one worth debunking that others haven't debunked 50 times over. So, once again, thanks, and see you on the next one, potentially.